Hello, welcome everyone to this Passport series on careers and international development. My name is Anna. I'm the Youth Engagement Manager for the UNA USA National Office. It's so great to see many of you on our call today and who will be watching this later to share this interest together, to ask questions, and to hear from our amazing panelists. So thank you so much for joining. This session will be recorded. We want to thank our sponsor, the United Nations Federal Credit Union, for making our Passport series possible, an exclusive member experience for all UNA USA. And I turn it over to welcoming remarks from Marielle Ali from our UNA USA National Council.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Anna, for the warm welcome and introduction. I'm really excited to have this discussion today on careers and international development. We will be joined by three young professionals who have a lot of experience and a lot of tips and tricks to share with all of you in regards to their careers. So we'll actually just kind of go ahead and get started. So we are going to have, as you see on the screen there, we're going to hear from Katherine Armeier. She is with Save the Children US. We'll also hear from Pratik Desai, who's with World Benchmarking Alliance, and Emma Pfister with Innovation Labs. And we'll actually go ahead and get started with Emma. So Emma, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Great to virtually meet all of you. My name is Emma Pfister, and I work at the Response Innovation Labs as the advisor for marketing and development. So largely, it's marketing, communications, and fundraising is what I do. The Response Innovation Lab is an initiative founded by World Vision, Save the Children, and Oxfam that works in humanitarian responses around the world to bring innovation into those responses to do better, whether that's quicker, being more responsive, or reaching more vulnerable people in that response. We work at both the global level with innovations as well as working with local populations and local innovators to find ways to do things better and try to scale them within that response and potentially even beyond that particular response. I come from a background of working in water, sanitation, and hygiene, which is where I spent most of my career prior to moving over to UNICEF USA, which is how I got to know UNA USA and really loved the partnership that the two organizations have. So it's a real privilege to get to speak to each and every one of you here. And I think the last thing that I want to share before I hand this over is that where I've ended up in my career today has really, it started when I was young and I had the opportunity to be an exchange student in high school and traveled to South America, to Chile, where I, for the first time in my life, had crossed out of the border in the United States, learned a different language, and saw the world with a totally different lens. And that is what prompted me to get where I am today. So I owe, as you can tell, a lot of gratitude to the Rotary Exchange Program for what they did to me and the trajectory that they sent me on. But ever since then, it's been a lot of not only personal ambition to do what I want to do, which is ultimately at the end of the day, help people in whatever capacity that I can, both personally and professionally, but also finding along that path the things that really make me excel at what I do and having people help me in that discovery. So I think throughout the questions that we asked today, that will be a theme that I will be picking up and hoping to share and pass on.
Thank you, Emma. We really appreciate you sharing a bit about your journey with us. And I think one thing that kind of stuck out to me that as I reflect on my own career journey is just thinking about the people that have helped me get to where I am. And like you said, I think that will be a theme that will come across through all of our presentations and maybe even some of the questions of our guests. So thank you. Great. So we're going to go ahead and now hear from Pratik from World Benchmarking Alliance.
Great, thanks. Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it just cut out a little bit. Well, thanks, Marielle, and great to be with all of you virtually as well in this new COVID environment. Thanks for joining and for having me. My name is Pratik Desai. I'm the Strategic Engagement Lead at the World Benchmarking Alliance. or WBA as we call it. The WBA was officially launched as a new institution relatively recently, actually, so just about a year and a half ago. And we were founded primarily to build benchmarks that assess and rank companies on their contributions to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So we work across 7 what we call systems transformations. So everything from social inclusion to digital inclusion, decarbonization of energy, the circular economy, the urban system, food and agriculture, and the financial system. And we are also founded as a multi-stakeholder alliance. So we have about 140 different allies, as we call them, which span financial institutions, civil society, multilateral bodies, reporting platforms, business platforms, research and academia, et cetera. My role at the WBA is really to serve as the point person for the alliance. So figuring out how do we engage and navigate those various stakeholder groups and bring them into our work. I also do a little bit of work with our policy team, figuring out how we connect the dots and make sure that our policy priorities across the globe, both at the regional levels, but also at a global level, working with the UN and other institutions, are aligned and driving towards shared priorities. My role previously to joining WBA was at the UN Foundation, which is how I know UNA USA. I worked first on the global partnerships team, primarily in corporate fundraising, and then moved into our executive office where I focused on policy and private sector engagement. Before that, I was an Americorps fellow for a year and held a number of internships with the federal government and with NGO in Washington, DC, doing development work as well. I graduated from Boston University with an international relations degree, undergrad degree. And the pictures that you see on the screen here sort of show my progression and how I got to where I was. Similar to Emma, also have a background from a young age being exposed to international affairs and development issues. And then when I was in college, spent a lot of time studying the UN and thinking about the role of international institutions in development, security, peace and justice, et cetera. So I always knew I wanted to stay close to that world. And then with the advent of the SDGs, of course, really figured out that there was a role to play there and wanted to get more involved, and then sort of led me to working with business and development. So I think the theme that cuts across all of this a little bit differently to Emma's, but related, I think, is saying yes to opportunity and just kind of rolling with the punches. And when something comes your way, really seizing on it and understanding where the opportunity aligns with your interests and your skills, because that's really, I think, where you're the most set up for success. So looking forward to delving into all of that deeper with all of you.
Thank you so much. And, you know, similar to Em, I think one thing that kind of stuck out from what you just shared is exactly that, saying yes to opportunities. And sometimes opportunities come and, you know, you're like, well, I'm not really sure if this is, you know, where I want to take my career or how I envision myself, and things happen and unfold. And, you know, you end up finding that your career unfolds in many interesting and good ways. So thank you. Katherine, over to you.
Hi, great. And I'm so excited to get to talk to everyone today and to be on this panel with such a great group of other panelists. So yeah, I would say that my career in international development really got kickstarted after college when I went into the Peace Corps. I did the Peace Corps in Mali in West Africa, and I was a water and sanitation volunteer for 2 years there. I was based in a very small rural community, working with a community organization or sort of like a village community association to essentially build water infrastructure and replace a lot of the old hand-dug wells that they had that were causing some issues for diarrheal disease, as well as promoting hygiene. So similar to some of the WASH work that Emma mentioned she's done. And this experience definitely shaped my kind of career trajectory. One thing that I became very interested in was sort of figuring out what contribution I was actually making by, implementing these projects and working with community members to build this infrastructure. Was it worth the investment? It was a lot of time and a lot of money for community members, for the donors who provided the support, and I wanted to understand better what impact it was actually having. And so that sort of propelled me into wanting to go into the monitoring and evaluation field, which is my current role. I'm the Director of Monitoring and Evaluation at Save the Children in our Department of Hunger and Livelihoods. So talking a little bit more about the next steps after Peace Corps, I almost immediately, I jumped into the United Nations Foundation, which is a common link across several of us panelists, and really enjoyed my work there as an intern, first for the Girl Up campaign and then for the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. But I quickly realized that I really wanted to get more into this M&E space based on my Peace Corps experience. So I went to grad school, and I specifically focused on humanitarian assistance and sort of monitoring and evaluation for humanitarian assistance. That gets me to the second photo, which you can see is essentially a line of refugees lined up to get water. I took this photo when I was in grad school doing my practicum. So I spent several months in DRC and then in refugee camps in Uganda, doing some research on human rights violations and then also on water and sanitation. And this for me sort of emphasized the need to better understand what was working and what was not. Clearly in this refugee camp where people were lining up for hours to get clean water, something was not working and the data wasn't necessarily being acted upon to show that that wasn't working. So that further interested me in sort of the M&E space and how we can make sure to capture data on the quality of interventions we're providing to communities and improve our programs accordingly. So after grad school, I went back to the United Nations Foundation for a couple of years. And then recently, in the last 2 years, I hopped over to Save the Children, where I am now. And in my current role, I support both humanitarian and emergency programs, as well as some like 5-year development programs. So this last photo is just a picture of one of the knowledge sharing events that we've had, where I was discussing some of our findings from a recent Nepal evaluation where we saw pretty big improvements in stunting of children and other malnutrition indicators. But I also do a lot of work on Somalia, and then I manage a team of 3 people at the moment that are US based, who all provide support to our program staff as well in helping to shape evaluations and other monitoring and evaluation activities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katherine. Really appreciate hearing from you. And as someone with a kind of program management background, when I hear M&E, I get very excited. So thank you for sharing. So we're actually now going to kind of go ahead and move into a moderated discussion. And then after the moderated discussion, we'll open it up for questions from all of you. And I believe you can kind of go ahead and continue to put in your questions in the chat box in the meantime. So again, thank you to the 3 of you for sharing a bit about your journey. So I have one question for all of you. So what is one skill that you worked on early in your career that helped you to where you are today?
I'm happy to take that on. One of the big things that has been a real help to me was working on sort of research methodology. That's something that I started, just getting into when I was in Peace Corps in terms of, okay, how can I monitor certain indicators for my particular programs, but then further developed through grad school, and it's been a real asset to me in my current M&E role.
I'll jump in next. Language being one of the skills that I had worked on starting with my exchange program in high school with Spanish, but it took me a few years kind of post my bachelor's degree to really see the utility of the skill of knowing Spanish fluently. But later when I got into more of my graduate work and then my postgraduate work, that asset of knowing another language fluently really helped me be able to emphasize more in the work that I was doing. I started to concentrate a lot more in Central and South America and really built that as a focus area. And so it not only kind of helped me hone in, but it also really helped me stand out, that I knew that extra language. Also just the other side of knowing a language, that it helps so much other skills be adapted. It puts a different lens on how you see the world. So that would be, yeah, I think for me, that is the one skill I find that I've probably utilized the most over my career.
Mine would actually be, I guess, what you would call a soft skill, but I would say communications, and just learning how to communicate, both, written, being able to write and make sure that your ideas are articulated in a coherent and a concise way, but also making sure that you're able to speak to different audiences, you're able to tailor your message. You're able to sort of understand what another person might find palatable or might find useful or relevant. And so being able to sort of navigate different audiences and speak to them in a way and communicate with them in a way that really engages them, I think has been a crucial skill for me that I learned early on, but has served me well through every role that I've actually held.
Thank you. I know that I'll go ahead and kind of add a bit, is that for me, it's also a soft skill. So networking, being comfortable with, talking to, colleagues, mentors, internship supervisors, building those relationships, and through that, asking them for feedback. How, what are ways that I can improve? What are some things that I could do? What are some opportunities that I could look into? So that's something, and it's, it's something that I'm still working on. And I think, there should always be space for kind of learning and development in everyone's career journey. It's a continual thing. It doesn't just, stop once you get into that job. So thank you all for sharing. Great. And so I guess kind of going back to a point that I believe it was Emma, you had mentioned about, finding individuals who help you throughout your career path. So if you could all kind of share just a bit about who have you turned to for help in navigating your career path?
I can go ahead and start. I think, one of the things that I found most helpful is developing close relationships with any former colleagues or supervisors from past internships or jobs. So my very first internship out of college, before I even landed a full-time job, my supervisor was one of the most influential figures in helping me to not only navigate that post-college environment where you're trying to figure out, where exactly do I land? How do I take the skills that I've learned in school, but actually apply them to a real world context? But then also thinking through, how do I navigate the ups and downs of my career, whether that's saying yes to opportunities that come my way that I may not have anticipated, or thinking about different challenges that may be thrown my way in a way that I might not have otherwise thought about, and also being sort of an objective voice and someone who knows your skills, who knows the context of your work, who's seen you in a working environment, and then is able to objectively say, I have your best interest at heart, but I think either X or Y. But then what I've also found is those people are usually the ones who also give you enough direction to help you make a decision, but also enough agency to let you make the decision on your own and then be successful in dealing with that. So I would just encourage everyone, if you have a professor or a supervisor from a work study program or an internship, really focus on developing those connections and making sure that you are building meaningful connections and not just having them, not just going to them and saying, can you be a reference for me, but really building that connection and making sure that it's a two-way connection and not just a transactional one.
Yeah, I have to echo that. I think for me, the people that have been most influential in my career path are similarly former or current supervisors, just because they know my work so well, and they know sort of my strengths and my weaknesses, that I've been able to go to them for advice and for guidance on where, if I'm looking for a next step, where that might be, whether it's in the same organization or whether that's in a different organization. So I just have to agree with Pratik about that, because I think it's been very, very similar for myself as well.
I would also echo all of that, and I would add to the kind of the way that I've broken it down is having both a professional and a personal mentor. The professional obviously helping with the career, and it's usually individuals that I see myself down the road in that role or in that context. It could be former supervisors, or maybe it's another type of leader in the organization in another division, but building that relationship. But also the personal, because having an advisor or mentor in your life that can really help you gauge the personal side of where you want to take your own life is a little bit different than the professional. I think having both, and echoing what was said, that having somebody who can be objective is important, who gives you, like they said, the agency, but has your best interest at heart. Ultimately, the decision comes down to you. So it's also taking account your own individual thoughts on it, and taking what people are saying and your mentors are saying, but then putting some time and space to really be able to make that decision for yourself. Also echoing that all the relationships that you build throughout your career, keeping in contact and keeping them in your network and continuing to touch base, I have found to be incredibly important. And just reaching out for resumes, when you're 50 years old and you're reaching out for resumes, you want to make sure that those people have been a part of your journey and your story all along the way. So keeping that network close, keeping in contact with them, keeping those professional and personal relationships alive, I think goes a long way to helping guide yourself individually and being able to listen to others and what their perspectives are.
Yes, thank you, Emma. So you're kind of saying all this, and I'm thinking about, like, yes, I've done that, or I've done this, and I think that's really important. And kind of to Pratik's earlier point about making sure that it's a two-way relationship. That there are two people. It goes both ways. That you're not just asking the person for things, but that you're also giving. So something that I like to do is I like to ask my mentors, how can I be helpful? Maybe I've come across an article that's related to the work that they like to do, or maybe it's, a webinar that I saw, or sharing something with them. So I think that's really important. And, keeping those relationships. I am still in touch with my undergrad school advisor, and I graduated in 2011 from undergrad, and I sent her an email the other day, and it was just like, just to check in and see how she was doing. So that's really important. Wonderful. Great. So I know, this question kind of comes up a lot. And so I know kind of many attendees on the call today, you guys might be thinking about graduate school. And so some of you may feel like, a master's degree is needed, but some may realize that maybe it's not. So what was your decision like to attend or not attend graduate school?
I guess I can go ahead and start. So I did not go to graduate school, or have not gone to graduate school yet. It's still an open question of whether I will or won't. I think that, it's a really cliche answer, which I know when I was a student, I hated hearing this, but it really does depend on what you want to do. And it really does depend on sort of what you're looking to get out of a graduate program experience. So for some people, it's really important, for Katherine, I'm sure she can tell you, if you want to work in the monitoring and evaluation space, it probably would serve you well to get a master's degree, depending on what kind of role in that space you want. But if you don't already have those skills, to build those skills. For some people who want to get into, very specific issue areas, or who want to become known as experts in their field, going to graduate school can be really useful. For some people, like myself, I knew early on that I liked being a generalist. I liked being someone who worked on a lot of different issues. I knew that if I went to graduate school, it probably wouldn't be for an issue-specific master's program, but more sort of a functional program like an MBA or an MPP or something like that. But some of this also comes back to circumstance, and you know, you can plan and plan and plan. I thought I was going to go to grad school 2 years ago. I had taken my GMAT. I was applying to MBA programs, and then I got the current job opportunity that I have now. And at the time, you know, after doing some deep internal reflection, but then also talking to former colleagues and supervisors and mentors, what I decided was in that moment, it was more important for me to have this experience in this new role, because I felt like I was going to be able to gain those skills and build that network that I probably would have gotten anyway in a graduate program. And for me as well, you know, I wasn't in a position where I was ready to take on significant school debt to do that if I could get the same experience working. So it just depends, but I would really say if you are looking to even build specific skills and you just don't know how to do them other than going to grad school, even just thinking creatively, what else is out there? You know, I knew that I wanted to get more experience in financial management and accounting and economics. I'd done a little bit of it in undergrad, but not really. I did the Harvard HBX, the Harvard Business School's online introduction to sort of managerial, introduction to management program. I forget exactly what it's called now. But that was a really useful way for me to build those skills without going to grad school. So all that to just say, really just do some deep reflection and think about what's best for you.
Yeah, I can only echo that, because I think that it's all about the skills that you can get through grad school. It shouldn't be a box checking exercise. I just recommend for people to sort of think about your dream job and think about what skills that job requires and whether or not it requires any specific or hard skills in order to get that job. So for me, as was mentioned, I mean, in the M&E space, there are a lot of hard skills that you have to have, statistics and, you know, different analysis techniques and research design. And I knew that while I could get some of that information with a program of self-study, I also just know that I'm not necessarily one to be that motivated to sort of self-motivate myself to go through that kind of program and make time and space for that. And so I did go to grad school, and I'm very happy that I did. I know that when my organization is hiring for meal staff, it definitely is a bonus when we see a graduate degree on the resume for meal positions specifically. That said, it's also a bonus if you have a few years of experience working before going into grad school and or at the same time, because I think that work experience really shows that you were thoughtful about what program you wanted to go into and what technical area, and that you sort of know that that's the path you want to be on. So for those that do choose to go to grad school, I would recommend doing at least a couple of years or even just 1 year of work before going into it, and really make sure that's the kind of work that you want to get into. However, I do want to say that, you know, at SAVE, I have a lot of colleagues that don't have master's degree and are in very high level positions, especially in the program management function. There's several high level people, director, senior director level, that are managing people with grad degrees. And it doesn't matter whether you have a grad degree or not. It's a good experience that those folks have had. And I know they're still happy they went to grad school, but the folks that didn't go to grad school are very happy that they saved the money and the time and are still in, you know, a very good position, you know, managing folks who have and have not gone. So I think it really is just about what you want to do with your career and the specific skills that you need.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I'll share a little bit more about a few more thoughts, but also kind of, I think personally, where I stand on this issue. So number one, in hiring, what I've seen my managers do, what I've looked for is experience. The degree didn't really factor into it much. It was more about the experience and the references that I was getting that could really back up the experience of that candidate. And that goes down to internships. I mean, there are many organizations, say UNICEF USA, that have great internship programs that look into those experiences, those organizations, especially if they have kind of an intern professional development program, are really valuable and something that I would look at in looking at candidates, and know that these candidates were coming in with a great amount of experience because I knew those programs. I'd say if you are looking at grad school, the alumni network and their alumni activities, look into that and dive into it. Grad school isn't only about the classes that you're taking, but it should be about that alumni network that you can be a part of the rest of your life. It should be paying back dividends to you. And so judge that and judge it hard, because that should be something that you are getting out of what you're paying for in grad school. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the money. I paid for my graduate degree. I'm still paying for my graduate degree. And it is a constant monthly question I ask myself when I write that checkout. Well, I don't do check anymore, let's be honest, it's a digital world. But I wonder, was it worth it? Would I still have the same experience? Would I be where I am now, which I'm really happy where I am now? And I don't know, but I do know that that student loan payment is still a lot of money that I am paying. I'm a part of a student loan program that when an individual works for a nonprofit, after a dedicated amount of time, the government will supposedly forego the rest of that loan if you can demonstrate that you've worked in service for 10 years. But that program is also something that I've had to move my entire career around to make sure that I am consistently involved in it and always working for a nonprofit. Or there might have been other opportunities that were also in my skill set and of interest that I didn't take because I needed to stay in that program. All about because of these financial economic decisions, because I took out that massive loan for grad school. So do really think about it deeply. I don't know if I gave it a really good thought. When I think back to that 20-something-year-old self that I was, I don't know. And knowing what I know now, I would have thought about it very differently. I think some great avenues are looking at organizations that have student loan or student programs where they're going to pay for some of your schooling. Take your time. If you can work and go to school, it might take you longer, but at the same time, you're getting experience, which, as I said, is I think the number one thing to have, but you're also getting help paying for that. And looking for those opportunities, I think it makes it more comfortable on the other end when you are a professional, when maybe you want to buy property, buy a house, have a family, or whatever you choose to do. It builds more flexibility for you later in life than having to pay these massive university loans. That being said, we are in this COVID time and universities are being hit very hard. So we don't know what that's going to look like on the other side of that. But my experience today would be all of that.
Thank you guys for sharing. I mean, just kind of reflecting on my own decision. So I actually went to grad school straight out of undergrad in 2011. I went to NYU for my master's in global affairs. And I think, to Emma's point, and I think also some of the other points that Katherine had mentioned as well, there are definitely take your time thinking about going to grad school. There are different levels and different types of grad programs. The particular program I went to, while I'm, very happy that I went, I learned quite a bit, but it was mostly aimed at people who had a couple of years of experience. So I was at somewhat of a disadvantage compared to my colleagues. So some of the people that I went to class with, some of them were already working diplomats. In some cases, they were returned Peace Corps volunteers. There was a very small minority of students that, were just coming straight out of undergrad. I mean, I was able to learn quite a bit from them, and I'm very thankful. But again, do take those, decisions, to heart and really think them through if that's something that works for you and is meant for you. And I guess just kind of one other point that I'll add, and this is kind of to Pratik's earlier point about, you don't always need a graduate degree. So I have about 5 or 6 years of experience in, program management. And I'm currently studying for my program management professional certificate. That's something that you don't need a degree for. So there are a lot of kind of certificates and things where you can gain some of those skills that you need for the different types of careers that you would like to kind of go into. Thank you, guys. And I guess just one final question before we turn it over to kind of the audience and all of you. how has your work changed during COVID? And I think maybe a good question that maybe many of us are thinking about, are your organizations hiring right now? I don't know, maybe Katherine, you want to kick it off?
Sure, no problem. So I would say that my work itself hasn't necessarily changed, but how we do it has a little bit. We've moved a lot of our monitoring at the field level to cell phone monitoring instead of, previously we were doing a lot of in-person monitoring, but in the programs that I work on in Somalia and in Peru with the Venezuela response and in a number of other countries, we've had to move to remote monitoring. So that's changed quite a bit. And we've also seen a pretty scary thing, which is just that the needs in the communities we work in are really intensifying just because of restrictions around movements, around, issues with markets being inaccessible, fewer vendors being out because of the concerns of transmitting COVID. So that's been a big issue. And we've actually gotten even busier because we have so many more proposals that we're submitting to address these increasing needs that we see at the community level. But in terms of the question around if our organization is still hiring, yes, it absolutely is, because we are seeing the needs increase, therefore our workload is increasing. And I actually just hired someone onto my team, a meal specialist, and I did her entire onboarding remotely, which was a very new experience. We shipped her laptop, and we, have had to do everything via Zoom and, video calls. So that's been an interesting experience. We're used to onboarding folks remotely at the field offices, but not as much in DC. So that was an interesting experience.
I want to echo what Katherine has said. We also had this time period with COVID has increased the workload, but also shifted it dramatically for us. A lot of our labs are not able to really conduct the work that they were doing because of COVID, whether that's transportation or just shifting. And we are a response organization, so naturally we would pivot and look at COVID. And it's also provided a lot of opportunity, especially for innovation. So we are quite busy at work, responding and writing proposals, trying to get funding to support a lot of local innovators that are also helping vulnerable populations. So there's still a large amount of the world that is still kind of in the pre-COVID phase. So the more awareness building that we can do and ahead of time, the better we can prevent any effects. So that's been top of mind of all of us. And when it comes to, as far as my work, I work remotely anyways, so my day-to-day really hasn't shifted. It's just been what I'm doing that has. As far as hiring, we're a very small team. There's 2 of us in the central support unit, and then our labs have 1 to 2 people in each of them, because we utilize the larger network of World Vision, Save the Children, and Oxfam as a part of the initiative that we're in. So as Katherine said, Save the Children is hiring. I'm not sure about World Vision and Oxfam at this time. There's also been some cuts going on within the humanitarian space because there's been such a major shift in funding happening. But that being said, we do love having interns and people, because there's such a small amount of us. So we love having people that are willing to jump on board and intern and help us with some of our projects. That is of interest to anybody. You can go to the website at responseinnovationlabs.com, and on the contact sheet, you can message us and kind of tell us more about your experience, and we can see if it fits with some of the needs that we have. But keep your eyes out. There's a lot of opportunity, and even a 3-month internship is great experience to have on your resume.
So I'll just quickly jump in to say that, yeah, I agree with Katherine and with Emma in terms of having to change the way we do our work. For us, the core part of what we're doing has also shifted a little bit because we are seeing the businesses that we engage with that have had to make some incredibly difficult decisions regarding their ability to continue as businesses. So whether that means changing their business models or adapting their production to support needs that national governments might have, or whether they've needed to lay off staff because they just don't have the same needs in terms of production and consumption anymore. So we've seen a dramatic shift in that way. That also at the same time, though, has meant that we need to figure out how we continue to be responsive to business in a way that acknowledges those real effects that they're having and the choices that they're having to make, while also not letting go of the momentum around sustainability and the need for companies to prioritize the health and well-being of their people, and the way that they are tackling climate change, and the way that they're thinking about inclusion in their practices. So it's a complex process. We're also doing a lot of work with our government partners to try to figure out how do we help them think about working with business in a way that is respectful, but also of these priorities, but also acknowledges the real policy implications that this is going to have. So what I think all of that just points to is, and this goes back to your earlier question, Marielle, about skills that you need to gain. I also think it just points to the need to just be adaptive and be able to be nimble and respond. And you never know what's going to happen within an organization. So being able to just kind of jump in and say, you know, I'll do that, or that's not my job, but I'll pivot, or this is not the priority right now, but I will make it the priority. Like there's a lot of that shifting continuously that needs to happen, especially in a moment like right now. So that's just something to keep in mind. We are still hiring, but very limited. So I think it just depends on the organization and their funding realities as well, as Emma said.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for joining us. I know now we're going to shift over to answer all of your questions. So Anna, go ahead and take it away.
Great. We have about 15 minutes for questions. To be able to get to as many as possible, I'll ask our panelists to limit our responses to no more than 2 folks responding to each question, just so we can get through them quickly. The first question is for Pratik and Katherine. A couple of our attendees are debating whether to go Peace Corps or Americorps, and you know, they're trying to navigate, you know, how that impacts your career path, if there's any particular challenges with either program you want to mention, or particular benefits with either program.
So yeah, it's an interesting question, and actually one I grappled with as well. For me, one of the benefits, or one of the things that was attractive about Americorps was that it wasn't a full 2-year commitment, which I wasn't necessarily ready to make at that time, which Peace Corps requires. So that's just something to consider in terms of what are you actually even willing to do. There's also a little bit of, you know, you have to be, this wasn't necessarily applicable to me, but some of the people that I knew who were also thinking about applying for Peace Corps, you have to really be okay and know yourself and know what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with, and what you'd be okay saying yes to and what you're not okay saying yes to. So that's just something to just keep in mind as you're sort of thinking about what that means for you. One of the reasons I was interested in Americorps as well was, you know, I had a global background. I was raised in a different country. My family moved to the United States. I studied international issues, but I really wanted to sort of think about what does community engagement, community development, social impact look at a very local level. Now, coming out of that experience, what I learned was that it was a great experience, but I did not really enjoy it. Like I learned a lot from it, but it wasn't necessarily what fulfilled me or what got me really excited. And so that was a really important lesson, because if I hadn't had done that, I wouldn't have known that I wanted to get back into global issues. And that's how I ended up ultimately at the UN Foundation, which is how I ended up where I am now. So I would say just really think about sort of what your priorities are, what you're interested in, and then let that guide you.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit more specifically to Peace Corps. I'm a huge Peace Corps advocate, as most Peace Corps volunteers are, our RPCVs that you may meet. It definitely changed my career path and gave me a really great insight into what at least this one community, you know, at sort of the local level is like. And I think that has given me a really good perspective throughout the rest of my career to like have a little bit better of an understanding of sort of what other countries and other societies are like, even if it's just one specific experience. Also, I will say that Peace Corps is one of the best ways to learn a language. Language, I know Emma brought up, as one of the best skills that she has learned, and actually part of me was like, dang, I should have answered that, because speaking French has definitely been a huge bonus for my career. I know that it's been a factor in my hiring for at least 2 different jobs. When I hire on for my team, we pretty much require either French, Spanish, or Arabic, just because we work so closely with other countries where that just helps to build the relationships. Whether or not the reports are written in that language, it just really helps sort of get to know people. And, you know, when you do field visits, to be able to get around the country and visit locations that aren't just the capital city. So, you know, through Peace Corps, I definitely got to improve my French, but also learned a completely different language, Bambara. So, you know, it's not serving me in any capacity at this point that I speak fluent Bambara, because it's only the language pretty much of Mali and like a little bit of Burkina Faso. But it was still just an eye-opening experience. And I met so many people that shaped me as a person, and that I really, you know, still stay in touch with. And so it's like both a professional and personal experience that I really felt was powerful. That said, it's extremely scary. You go to a completely new country. You are essentially trained for a couple of months in the basics of a language, and then in some cases just sort of dropped off in a community. Like, oh, here's where you're going to live for the next 2 years. So it's daunting, and I get that. And I think one of the only reasons that, you know, I was able to sort of take that leap is because I had had a friend from undergrad who did Peace Corps 2 years before me. So I was sort of hearing about her experiences, and in a way, even though it was a completely different country, it made me feel like I could sort of trust the organization and know that that I would be okay. But it was terrifying for my parents, especially at the time, just knowing that, you know, with limited cell phone service and everything like that. But for me, it was definitely a foundational moment in my career and in my life, to be honest.
Thank you both. I'll have Emma kick off our next question, and then others can jump in. But a couple folks have asked if there's any uniquely challenging aspects of specifically working in international development as compared to a local context, whether that's challenges you're facing in your work or just challenges that face you as an individual.
Good questions. Beyond the challenge sometimes of finding a time where we can meet across different time zones, that seems to be a persistent one. I would say the challenge is also the reason why I love this line of work, is because it's constantly changing. It's very dynamic. You know, on a local level, of course, the factors are very different, and not smaller, but like it's just a different, maybe not as many, or they're not as big. But overall, that whole changing dynamic of the context that we work in, whether it be development or humanitarian, it brings up a lot of challenges. An entire project can shift because of local mayoral elections. But that's also the fun part about it. Like, that's why I sign up to do this, is to not only like be a part of that and to support the local communities, but because I also really enjoy like trying to figure out how we move forward from there. How are we still achieving these objectives and hitting these goals? So the challenge also one of the best parts about this job.
I'm going to also give sort of like the opposite side of the coin, because sometimes I feel like there aren't that many differences. You know, of course, yes, time zones and languages and lots of other stuff, but the fundamental problems, I think, oftentimes are very much the same in the United States as well. And I think, you know, a lot of the programs that I work on are cash assistance programs, so essentially doing cash transfers to vulnerable households. And in some cases, we do like food distributions to households during famine. And a lot of that, you know, I always sort of draw parallels to the United States, where we have, you know, the SNAP program, where right now, you know, there was cash assistance to households affected by COVID. We're actually, my team, which is international facing, is working with our US program team, because Save the Children does both domestic and international programs. We're working together to help them figure out how to target vulnerable households and do cash assistance to them as well, because we know that so many people are suffering right now with, losing their jobs and really struggling to feed their families. So, there's a lot of differences between the two types of work, but in some ways they're not that different, just because so many of the problems exist here in the US too, in my opinion.
Thank you. Pratik, I'll have you start with the next question, and then Marielle, I'm gonna want you to answer this one too. This question is about volunteer work. Obviously not everyone can have a full-time volunteer gig or unpaid internship. What are some other ways that you found to build your skill set outside of the traditional 9 to 5 to advance in your career?
Yeah, no, so it's a really good question, Anna. So I mean, I think that, when it comes to thinking about your skills, I think it's useful to think about it in terms of hard and soft skills as well, actually, because I think and we've already talked about some of this, the hard skills that you might need to acquire, which, there's so many online programs now and massive open online courses and the certificate programs and all sorts of things. And I think especially now during the COVID crisis, so many platforms have opened up their platforms either for free or at a discounted cost. So definitely take advantage of all of those while you can. But I think that also just thinking about some of the soft skills that you want to develop and ways to do them. I mean, any professional development organizations that are out there or local charities that may have young professional boards. There are so many of them in every city, especially in Washington, D.C. if you live in D.C., but they're all over the country. If you're interested in, the nonprofit world, there's a lot of networks out there that are focused specifically at bringing together folks who work in the NGO sector. So definitely look at joining those. I think that there's also finding ways that you can volunteer in your community. So whether that's with your church or at your university or at a school, or maybe your parents have a small business and you help out there on the weekends. It could be anything really, but I think just being able to have those transferable skills, no matter what it is that you're doing, finding a way to be able to talk about how things you might have learned in any part of your life could be applicable to the job that you're trying to get. Is always useful. And I think you'll be surprised actually at things that you might consider not important, or things that you might consider, oh, I volunteered at this summer camp 2 years ago. If you actually really think about, what did I learn at that camp? Oftentimes you surprise yourself by the richness of the experience and how much of it is directly applicable to the job that you might be looking for. So yeah, I would just say, like, look at your network, look at the opportunities out there, look at the people you know, and just start putting feelers out and saying, how can be of assistance? Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm interested in. Here's what I like to do. And then say yes to the opportunity.
Thanks, Pratik. So I actually have very kind of similar background as well. So I actually joined UNA USA as a member, I think in 2013, so about 7 years ago. And yeah, so I was there for about 7 years, and it was really just an opportunity for me to get closer, to get to knowing, okay, what does the UN do? How can I be involved? I think, like, all of you, and then maybe some of the, guests on our call, I have a full-time job. I work for the UK mission as a local staff person, and I volunteer. I'm a volunteer for UNA USA and a couple of other organizations. And I think a lot of it is also just sharing with your family and friends and your support network, saying, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to do. Can you support me in some of this? So and just kind of sharing with some of you. So I have a family and I have a son, and sometimes I'm on volunteer calls at night, and I'd have to tell, either my mom or my dad or, my partner to say, hey, can you watch, my son for a little bit? I'm going to get on a volunteer call. So really, I think it's one, kind of building a network, letting them know what you're interested in, and just finding those flexible volunteer opportunities, because a lot of them are out there. They're really all out there.
Thank you. And our last question I will pose to everyone, and I'll have Katherine started off, the question came from an attendee asking about what advice you'd give to someone who's applying for entry-level positions post-graduation. And I kind of want to reframe this in a way of you speaking to yourself. You're yourself as a young 20-something. You've just graduated. Maybe put yourselves in the shoes of this graduating class that graduated in such unique circumstances. Would love to hear just a bit of advice you'd have for them.
Well, one thing, that at least for myself, I probably would have told myself, like check your expectations a little bit. After Peace Corps, I was applying for, just not realizing how high level the jobs were that I was applying for. They were jobs I would never in a million years get with my level of experience. And that was just something that for some reason I didn't realize. And so I would say sort of think about what if you can, talk to people who work at an organization that you want to work at, show them your resume, see if they can just give you some guidance about what levels of positions might be appropriate to you so that you can really focus your efforts on applications to those specific positions instead of, reaching for a position that really you're probably not going to get just because you don't have enough experience yet. So that would probably be some advice that I would give myself. But also, there are organizations that pay for internships. I know for myself, when I did my first couple of internships at UNF, they were both paid. I think that UNF has now moved to unpaid, but Save the Children still does pay for internships. I know plenty of other organizations do as well. So don't discount those, especially if you're coming right out of undergrad. Those are a really good way to get your foot in the door. And I was hired on full-time from an internship. I've hired on 2 other people from internships that they've been at onto full-time positions. So to me, it's one of the best pathways if you're still at that entry-level stage to get into a full-time job and work your way up.
I'd add to that. I think, we're in a different time. There's a lot more digitization of ways that you can get involved or even join conferences, this panel, for instance. So the more that you're involved and the more that you're able to reach out and meet people on whether it be virtually and build that network and utilize that network. Persistence, I think, is the key word, at least in my experience, that got me the jobs and where I was. When I got my first real professional job, it took me, I spoke to not only the directors, but the CEO of this organization for probably over a year and letting them know, hi, my name's Emma. I really like what you do. I had engaging questions for them. And then finally, when an opportunity came up, they knew who I was. I was really focused about what I wanted and where I wanted to work, but that persistence paid off. But be persistent and be respectful of those in these roles, because they are, probably full-time roles, but be persistent. Ask for a coffee or a quick 15-minute phone chat if you want to learn more about the organization. You'll be surprised at the way people will be receptive and responsive to help you out, especially as you're starting out in your career. Even if you're mid-career and you want to switch, you'd be surprised at how many people have been in your shoes and would love to help you.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice from both Katherine and Emma, and I would echo both of them. I would say, if I had to say one thing to myself, I would say just be really honest with yourself about what it is you're looking for, and what it is that is going to make you happy. And so the reason I say that, and this kind of went back to one of the earlier questions about the challenges of working in development. I think that it can be easy when we think about, especially looking at the 3 of us here, we all work in Washington, D.C., we all work at sort of HQ. That's not necessarily development in the context that you might be thinking about it, right? But there are opportunities in local offices, in field offices, at HQ level. There's opportunities doing programmatic work and implementation work, but there's also opportunities to work on the finance teams or the operations teams or the accounting teams or communications or policy work. So really think about, what is it that you are interested in and that you think that you can contribute meaningfully to not only an organization, but the world. and then look for where those opportunities are. And if you know that you have a particular passion about being in the field, then look for those opportunities. And as Katherine said, check your expectations, but look at those organizations that are going to make give you those opportunities and make you feel that sense of fulfillment. So I would just say all of that to just say, you know, some deep reflection, which I know can be challenging when you're stressed and you're trying to just make sure that you have something lined up post graduation. But I think if you do that reflection, it will pay off mightily in the end.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for those pieces of advice for our attendees. I hope everyone who tuned in today found this conversation very helpful. I'm excited by it. Marielle, thank you so much for moderating our discussion. To all of our panelists, thank you. I just want to remind everyone who's on our call today about several opportunities we have for UNA USA young professionals. Again, to build your volunteer experience, to gain some of those professional skills, to build your network, whether that's writing for our blog, joining our upcoming Emerging Leaders Fellowship, or just being part of our affinity group. There's going to continue to be opportunities like this one for you to engage and to continue learning in your career path. We have several upcoming programs related to advocacy. If you want to work on your advocacy skills, public speaking skills, it's a great time to join our United Together campaign, which will happen the week of June 22nd. And then we also have our final UN 75 national consultation happening on Tuesday. We really hope that you'll join us to give your input to the UN on the future that you'd like to see. And then on Passport series for members, we have several that will be, again, professional development oriented. We'll focus on building your resume with UNA USA, how you translate some of your volunteer experiences to employers. We'll have our United Nations Federal Credit Union talk about the several benefits that they offer to UNA members. So again, lots of exciting programs coming up, but I know that this one was very meaningful and insightful for all of our audience. So again, to our panelists, thank you. And to our audience, thank you for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Anna.
much.
Thanks, Marielle.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.